Now, to medicines. I want to talk to you about something that you and I are all paying a huge amount of money for. And it has to do with outdated medications. It is my belief that very few medicines become outdated. Those are stable molecules, and they're put in a form that deteriorates very slowly, if at all. There was such an experience that happened with tetracycline a few years ago, but the information on medications becoming outdated goes back to the 1980s. If, for instance, medicines could be kept for much longer periods of time, then it would cost much less, because you might need to go back to a medication, or you might supplement a new medicine with an old one, but the one that has expired has to be discarded. I encourage you to speak to your HMOs and to urge the drug companies, if you have any connection with them, to begin to do studies to find out or have someone independent, someone like the Department of Pharmacology at the university, St. Francis Hospital, Hartford Hospital, to do studies to see what is the percentage of loss of potency of medications that have gone beyond their expiration time. And I'm talking about medications that may be a year, 2, 5, or 10 years out of date. I think that it's like I said, it is mostly nonsense that these things degenerate. And I don't want to hear suppositions. I want to hear these things being tried, evaluated, even things in glass vials, insulin, epinephrine, sodium bicarbonate, things that would be injected either intramuscular, but also all of the pills that people are taking. There is a huge amount of chemical contamination which is occurring because medications are being discarded. The next thing is I want to talk about generic medications. Generic medications do save money, but I'm not sure they save lives. For instance, the most popular beta blocker is atenolol. Atenolol is generic, it's dirt cheap, it does what the beta blockers are supposed to, but it also makes one insulin resistant, and it is not a 24-hour medication. Many of the studies that have been done on the use of beta blockers in the treatment of various disorders used atenolol, and the atenolol was generally given once a day, which it is not a full 24-hour medication. So the point being that those studies frequently showed that atenolol was not as good a medication in the management of high blood pressure, in the management of this, that, the other, as were the other medications against which they were tested. It has the reputation of being a once-a-day medication. It is not a once-a-day medication. If I were going to take atenolol, I would take it twice a day. Now, Toprol and the long-acting form of Coreg, and more importantly, Bistolic, which is a brand new medication, which I am a speaker for. That means I appear to have a vested interest. You can throw the stone if you want. I bend over backwards to be fair and balanced. Bistolic is not a medication that is right for everybody. It may increase acid reflux, so if you have acid reflux, what's called GERD, it may not be the right medication for you. It may or may not work as well as Toprol or Coreg in reducing arrhythmias, but for high blood pressure in general, and for its beneficial effects on nitric oxide, which have been demonstrated, I strongly support the use of Bistolic or Coreg to replace atenolol, and I think that they have better metabolic effects than even generic Toprol, which is also less expensive than either of those two medications. Now, I want to talk about the National Cholesterol Education Program Framingham study, which was the study that helped define who needs to be treated with a cholesterol-lowering medication or a blood pressure medication. And when it comes to cholesterol medication, they got it terribly wrong, which has set up a whole national mentality that is wrong from beginning to end. The question is very, very simple. Do you wish to reduce the probability of heart attack, or do you wish to eliminate the risk of heart attack? Now, bear in mind, unless your numbers are higher, and unless they're brought quite a bit lower, you're going to have what's called a number of people who are treated who may or may not need that medication. And that leads you to the concept called number needed to treat, NNT. Well, the fact of the matter is those studies tend to go out 6, 8, or 10 years, but they do not go out over the lifetime. Now, the reason I'm talking about the NCEP, National Cholesterol Education Program, guidelines is because there was a very interesting study done in which coronary calcium was studied by CT scanning, which is radiation, to look at people in the NCEP guidelines. And what they found out, I'll read it to you. Of those in the low and intermediate risk groups, CT scan found plaque in 76%, with moderate to severe plaque in 40%, thus reclassifying them in the high-risk category. Let me explain that to you. 40% of the people who would not meet the guidelines for treatment of their cholesterol levels were found to have hardening of the arteries plaque of an extent adequate to then become such that they should be treated. Now that is disastrous, that a guideline can be wrong 40% of the time, and that is why I believe we need to think in terms of abolition of coronary artery disease as opposed to reduction in the incidence of coronary artery disease, which is the current guidelines. Now, people talk about getting the cholesterol down to this level if you have diabetes or if you've already had a heart attack or you have documented coronary artery disease. We need to get everybody's, excuse me, we need to get everybody's cholesterol, subtract the good cholesterol from the total cholesterol. So total minus good is all of the bad. And the name for the all of the bad is non-HDL cholesterol. Non-HDL cholesterol is not the whole story. Turns out there's vitamin D levels. Yes, I said vitamin D levels. There's the A1C, the diabetes test. For the first time, I heard it mentioned on the radio today. There are triglycerides. Of course, there's blood pressure, cigarette smoking, exercise, and so on. And if I'm sufficiently efficient with this, we'll talk about some of those. But my point being is that we should have as a national goal, and not by Malcolm X's by any means necessary, but not far away from that. We should have as a national goal to abolish coronary artery disease, which means when you subtract the good from the total and you have all of that bad, that number should only come up to 90 at the most. At the most. That's called the non-HDL cholesterol. So doing would essentially, but not absolutely, but essentially reduce heart attack and angioplasty by over 90% in the United States. It would have a vast effect on stroke. It would have a vast effect on sudden death. It would have a vast effect on angioplasty, open heart surgery. So that's what I'm going to suggest, that you want to have a non-HDL cholesterol. Subtract the good from the total, that's all the bad. It's called the non-HDL cholesterol of less than 90. You should also have a diabetes test, an A1C of 5.5. You should have a blood pressure of approximately 115/75, and you should have 25 vitamin D3 level approaching 80. Not 30, not 40, but 80. You should have triglycerides at about 100 or less. And those are the Preventive Medicine Center prevention numbers. If you have any question about that, you may call me at the office to discuss this at 549-3444.